If you liked this episode of the Hockey IQ podcast, please leave a like, a comment, and especially review our podcast. If you truly listened all the way to the end and you're listening to this right now, you enjoyed this episode. Please go and give it a 5-star review. That helps us out more than you know. Thank you so much and look forward to the next one. On the Hockey IQ podcast day, we bring on Marcie Kierpiec. Marcie, super excited to have you on. I've had so many people recommend you as like the ultimate skating coach because I think power skating's kind of a aged out term by now. But the idea more of just like how do we actually get power out of our edges, I think is the idea. How do you think about this?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I feel personally that term is misleading, and I do know that that's the word that we've been using for years, right? But at the end of the day, when I take the ice and I'm working with players, regardless of age, right? I'm not really teaching them power, right? I mean, if you think about, development and where players are, you know, they're not going to have power until they have hit puberty, that they're old enough and they're, doing that off ice training in the weight room or whatever, right? And so, I think it's misleading because if I'm working with a group of, let's say, 10 new players, and, I know parents and coaches think, oh, we're bringing a power skating instructor in, right? And she's going to make them more powerful. Well, I'm really not because they don't have, the muscular strength and power yet because as I said, they haven't reached puberty. They're not doing the training off ice yet. But I certainly can make them, more efficient. I can, give them better, teach them better technique, work on their movement patterns. So, I personally have been trying over the last 10 years to like make that shift. And instead of calling it power skating, I've been calling it hockey skating. I call myself a skating specialist, and I'm teaching hockey players how to skate, if that makes any sense. And in some area, it's catching on a bit. I've been, hearing people call it that a bit. So again, I don't know if that term power skating will ever disappear, right?
We
But
can blame Laura Stam. I was doing some research and I traced it all the way back to her.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That was, and I'm not pointing the fingers. I don't want, but I would say that she was, because she was the pioneer back in the, oh my gosh, was it 80s, 90s, 80s maybe, right? If you
Might
did,
have been late 70s, but yeah, she's
oh,
definitely the
yeah.
pioneer.
Yeah, 100%. And think about back then, what little we knew about like, exercise science and kinesiology, right? I mean, that is very new as well. So I think now over the years we understand more how players or people in general, how they grow, how they develop. And at the end of the day, those young players, under the age of, let's say, 14, they just don't have the muscular strength and power. So to call it power skating, it's like, I don't know. But that's what again, I think everyone knows what we mean by power skating, but I do have a degree in kinesiology, so when I hear power skating, it's the same as when I hear people say something about muscle memory, right? It's like nails on a chalkboard. So, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the term power skating. So,
So I'm
um,
curious as you're bringing this up, you talked about like a difference between like technique and movement patterns. So like when
mhm.
you say movement patterns, kind of what are you getting into? Because I'm thinking about just like for like my definition of this is when I watch players and they take way more steps than they need to get somewhere, like that's just poor movement patterns and technique rather than let's simplify down the skating and the footwork. What's
Right.
your thoughts?
So I guess what I mean by movement pattern, and let's take for example, probably the simple, like forward crossovers. Okay. So when I'm talking about the movement pattern, I'm talking about, starting off on that outside edge and taking the free leg and crossing it over, and then uncrossing on back onto the outside edge, crossing over to the inside edge, so that it's just going through the movement pattern of what you need to do to execute a crossover, if that makes any sense. A pivot transition, just skating forward and then pivoting from forward to backward and going backwards. So just the actual physical movement that you need to do in order to perform any skating element. That's what I mean by movement pattern, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, because I've always thought
Yeah.
about it from like a weight transfer. Like like the big one for me would be you're skating backwards, you're gonna then
Uh,
skate forwards, and it's like the like we'll say we're going from right to left. I'm thinking like, okay, you've got to slow your mass down with your right leg,
mhm.
transfer over to your left one, make sure it's in a nice bent position so you can explode out for the next step.
Yep. And you know what? I think you're taking it a little even more, making it more complex and deeper than I am, if that makes it, because you just threw power and stuff into that into your description. So to me, when I say movement pattern, that's like if you're doing a backwards transition, that's simply just going backwards, shifting your weight, let's say over to your right leg, opening up and pushing onto your left leg, going forward. It's just the physical movement in space. I'm not talking about power or anything like that yet. So when I talk about movement pattern, like that's when I'm working with like, let's say 10U, 12U players, and are those younger players that haven't quite hit puberty or have done all that off ice training, I'm mainly teaching movement pattern and technique to them. And I'm not bringing power into the mix yet.
Okay, so what's a
Yeah.
proper technique look like? So let's say we're
Well,
doing backwards crossovers.
okay. Backwards cross. So that's kind of a loaded question because when I'm talking about back crossovers, typically, I'll start, teaching the movement pattern of back crossovers in a circle because that's just, getting that, over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, how often do hockey players do back crossovers in a circle over and over again? Like that's not really realistic, right? Then I'll stretch it out and do lateral crossovers. I might just do like, three crossovers kind of linearly, like if they're walking the blue line. So if we take a step back and just talk about the actual movement pattern of a back crossover, um, I'd say you'd start by pushing off, doing I call them comma cuts, not C cuts, a quick push off your inside edge, transfer your weight to your let's say your right inside edge, transfer your weight then to your left outside edge, and then pull that left outside edge underneath as you cross your right foot over, and then transfer back to the left. Or I'm sorry, back to the right. And so I'm not on the ice. This is what so I'm doing using my hands to try
Yeah,
and
yeah.
go through this.
No one
Yeah.
else is gonna see this, but I get to see all the hand movements and closing the eyes to really visualize it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So like if you start, let's say you're pushing off your right inside edge, transfer your weight to your left, use that left outside edge and pull it under your right, and then cross your right over and then step out to the left again. So there's weight transfer going on from right to left, and then you're using your right inside edge to push, and you're pulling with your left outside edge to gain power, like squeezing your legs together, using your adductor muscles. So I mean, that would be an example of those back crossovers. And I just would teach those like and repeat them over and over again. Okay. That's when I'm working with younger players, right? To get just so they can get the movement pattern. Okay. To know like, push right, transfer to left, which I've already gone through. And then once I'm working with well, even so, even with younger players, then I will take those and I'll stretch them out. And I call them lateral back crossovers. Because think about it, if you're playing D, right? You're skating backwards, you're doing a crossover and then stepping out, crossover to the others. You're just doing one at a, crossover, step out, crossover, step out. So those are what I call lateral crossovers. You're moving up the ice, but every time you cross over and step out, you're doing some lateral movement because you want to be able to cover the ice, because you're trying to protect, your space and your net that you're going skating back toward. Um, so yeah, I work on that with players, and then also with the back crossovers, I'll do like maybe just two, three, or four
Well,
max.
I like where
I
we're
know I'm
heading with
getting a
this, and
little
I think you're jumping to places that we should go, but I just want to just one step at a time with this because I
okay.
think
I
it's
know
really
I'm getting a little
cool.
excited. I apologize. I
I
know.
can see the passion. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned was circles, which I thought was very interesting because I feel like most coaches, especially skating specialists, like put the kids on the goal line in three or four lines and you're skating all the way down. Seems like you're not doing that. You're doing it in little ovals of sorts, which is funny enough is one of the articles I've written, which is ovals, not lines. So I'm curious to understand your drill design as a skating specialist of why you've chosen to do it that way.
So, again, like I said, typically when you're let's say if we're still on backward and forward crossovers, in order for players to get just that repetition of the movement, you just would, like, so I might be working with, a team of, whatever, 16 players, and I might put, six on a circle, six on a circle, six, and then I might have a couple coaches assisting me. And so that way they're first and foremost, they're all moving, right? And they're not standing in lines, right? And then when you do them in a circular pattern like that, they're getting the chance to do that repetition of crossover after crossover after crossover after crossover after crossover. So that, I mean, that's traditionally, I guess you could say, the way that you would teach back crossovers, just so that they can get the movement. And then, now, so then you can talk about, you can also then layer in the technique once they get the movement pattern. And then, then after that, that's when I would then take them and I would stretch them, put them, as much as I don't like kids standing in line. But if I have, 8 players, I'll put them all on the goal line and have them all skate up the ice at once, doing what I call those backwards lateral crossovers. Crossover, step out, crossover, step out, crossover, step out. So again, that they're all moving. So,
Yeah, it's about
I guess
maximizing the repetitions of the movement pattern so that you get a little bit of familiarity. That
100%.
in air quotations, uh, muscle
Yes.
memory of sorts,
Don't,
which is
oh,
which is
don't,
really which is really firing in your brain. But we get the idea here. We're all smart.
okay.
So I just love that drill design of how do we actually design the activity, or if I got full ice, it's like two you start in small areas and then you just grow it as you need more size or whatever the technique we're working on, the movement pattern. So then maybe it's really small and tight and then goes really big. And I think it's really cool from a coaching perspective too, because the other kids can continuously work on things as maybe you just pull one or two kids out. So I love that you're doing that. I think that's really cool. And the second place that you're going to that I really love is around like the age appropriate skating instruction and coaching, because it looks very different from the youngest ages to the older ages. So I'd just love to hear from your perspective what that looks like from the younger to the older.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, and I've really tried to what's what I'm looking for, like pride myself in this, because I think it's really important that I think coaches understand the different not the different levels of development where players are. So when it comes to, like, 6U, 8U players, okay. Yes, I do work with players that young, okay. But when I'm working with players that are that young, basically I'm just working on, the infamous, ABCs: agility, balance, coordination, where I'm doing just a lot of different, oh gosh, like activities where there's, skating movement like hidden inside, simple things I do, like cars, no, what I'm trying to, oh no, not cars and cops, pirates and piranhas, like that's a little twist that I put on sharks and minnows, where I'll have players that are on the 3 face-off circles, they're pirates, and that, the other half of the players, they're piranhas, and they're skating around, outside the circles on, in the ice. And then the pirates have to go from, face-off circle to face-off circle, and without getting tagged by a piranha. If they get tagged by a piranha, then they become a piranha. So it's a little twist I do on, sharks and minnows. But again, there's a lot of skating skills hidden in there. Like, there's, changing direction, starts and stops, things like that. And so, and without giving them much direction. So, I mean, I could, that could be another whole podcast, all my ABC drills. But agility, balance, and coordination. And then, I mean, like something like simple technique. So let's say, for example, I call them chaotic flamingos, where, I have like the skater skating in an end zone, just like chaotically. And if I blow my whistle, I tell them to like turn into a flamingo, because a flamingo stands on one leg, so then they glide on one leg. So in that situation, I won't get too technique heavy, but I'll say, hey, you know, when turn into that flamingo, just, touch your feet together. Then that way, that's going to keep them more balanced. But I don't get into, blade pressure, ankle and knee bend, because at that stage of their development, first of all, their kinesthetic awareness is like for most 6U, 8U players is non-existent. Yeah, there's some kids that are maybe, really in tune to their body, but most kids at that age are not. They don't have the mental capacity to really have that mind-body connection. So I just keep it simple and I keep it fun. Focus on the ABCs and then, just do some, like I said, basic technique, you know. So that would be that. That'd be it for 8U, 10U, or 6U, 8U rather.
Yeah,
And
that
then,
that totally lines up with my thoughts. It's like they just don't have the body awareness. They can't connect the two yet. Like they're just mentally not there yet. So I just
right.
love that, making it fun, but also like the mnemonics that you're doing, like, oh, be a flamingo. Like it just creates
Yes.
such a vivid image of, okay, I got to get to one leg. And
Yep.
it's a ton of fun, but also it's like the proper language for that age group.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in fact, I get my tablet out and I have like a picture of a flamingo and I'll show it to them, what is this? That's a flamingo. I said, we're going to be flamingos today. And you know what? And that's all I got to tell them. And next thing I know, they're like all gliding on one foot. And if I want to do transitions, we're going to be chaotic owls. What is an owl do? An owl can turn their head. I said, oh, but we're going to be extra super duper owls and we're going to turn our whole bodies, and so I'll have them skate and be owls. And next thing you know, they're transitioning from forward to backward. And that's all I'm telling them is to be an owl. And, I know people might be thinking, oh my gosh, this woman's crazy. Yeah, well, I'm a little goofy, but, you know, kids love it. You have to remember your audience. When you're talking to 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, right? Think of where everything in their life is still, imaginary, make believe. I think Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development, right? Players that are that age or kids that are that age, they still live in that world of make believe where they pretend, they imagine. And so you can achieve a lot with them if you kind of put yourself in their mindset and speak to them on that level. And yeah, telling them to bend their knees and, stretch and extend. They're like, what? I don't know. I just have found that I've had such success with young players by just kind of speaking at their level.
Yeah, everyone forgets there's a big difference between the pediatrics and the adults. So we got to make sure that we get that right. So that's cool. All
Yeah,
right, so that's 8U, 6U. So as we're continuing on the continuum here, kind of what's
yeah,
next maybe for like that middle age before we get to the post-puberty.
yeah. Yeah, so for sure. So the 10U, 12U, that's where, I'll get into, like I said, the more distinct or movement patterns. Like I said with the forward crossover, forward outside edge, cross the outside foot over to the inside edge, push back to the outside edge. So, I'll talk about that movement pattern. I'll get a little bit more deep with technique, talk more about body lean when, especially on an outside edge, talk about blade pressure. If you're skating forward on an edge, you want to have your weight middle to back. If you're skating backwards, you want your blade pressure to be middle to front. So with a 10U, 12U player, I can certainly get, I do get more involved with the movement pattern, the move body through space and how to perform each of the skating skills. And then I'll also talk about the technique. Okay, this is where I'll start to talk more about knee. I'll bring knee bend and ankle bend into the picture. Do I do I demand knee and ankle bend of a 10U, 12U player? No, not yet. I'll bring it up, I'll mention it, I'll, give them some external cues to help them with it. Like, making sure that if you bend your ankles enough, you should feel the tongues of your skate, touch the bottom of your leg, or you should feel your laces, your top laces cutting into your ankle. Um, do I expect it at this level? No, I do not, because there again, they still just don't have the muscular strength or the muscular endurance to maintain that knee and ankle bend. So really at the 10U, 12U, this is where like I said, I'll start to dive into the movement pattern and the proper technique of the skating skills. But I also still, I mean, those kids, they're still kids. We have to remember that. So, I still do a lot of fun activities and, some of those 8U, 6U activities and games that I do them with my 10 and 12U players because they still like to have fun. Right? They're still kids. They're 10, they're 9, they're whatever, they're not mini adults, they're still children. So the fun factor still has to be part of it.
All right. Well, I'm curious as we're just talking about starting to get towards ankle and knee bend. What are your thoughts on eyelets? Do we skip a few?
That's a really good question. And yes, typically, and again, everyone's can be a little different, but typically, I've had success with players not using that top, like leaving that very top one undone. So it gives them that ankle mobility. Because if, or because otherwise, they use that top one, then it constricts their ankle mobility. So that's kind of been my recommendation is to skip the top one at least.
All right. And then am I a little crazy for sometimes going out to like say a stick and puck or even just a random skate around for the public skates with no tying of the skates, just like slap them on and go.
No, not at all. No, because if you think about speed skaters, if you think about their, I mean their skates, their the boot of their skate as we call it, it's like a sneaker or a tennis shoe, right? It's very low. Because if they don't need, a speed skater doesn't need um, any lateral support because they're just always skating in a straight line. They're not transitioning, right? If you look at a figure skating boot, okay, that's unfortunate that a figure skating skate boot really constricts ankle mobility because they really need lateral support. If you've ever watched it, right? They're throwing their bodies up into the air, they're rotating. Well, now you're talking four times or some quads now, some quints, right? Or lots of quads rather. They need that lateral support because they're coming down. They have to protect that otherwise there'd be high ankle sprains all over the place, right? And so, the hockey skates are kind of right in the middle. Um, we have the hockey skates, and I'm not an expert. I might be speaking outside of my wheelhouse when it comes to like hockey skates, but they have that back protection, right, for the Achilles, I believe for the Achilles tendons, that they're not getting hit by a puck. And they do need some lateral support because we are transitioning, we are going, starting and stopping a lot. But at the end of the day, yes, if you're not, using those top, one or two eyelets, that's going to give you like great ankle mobility. So no, you're not crazy for doing that at all.
Yeah, I think that's the one piece. And like the second piece that I always found, at least personally, was like I could really feel which edge was engaged at all times. And I knew when I was actually locked in on an edge versus completely off of it. Like I
Yeah,
just felt like that you could get the feel for inside, outside, and glide really
absolutely.
easily when you don't really have that ankles locked in the boot
Right.
hard.
And I've often said, think about, and I've used this with players, especially if I'm doing like a one-on-one lesson with an older player, and we're getting into the deep technique. I said, I want players to think of their skates as a tool. Like if you think about a hammer, if you want to hammer in a nail, right? Yeah, you use that hammer as a tool, but what is actually making that hammer move? Your lower arm and, your wrist and whatnot, or a screwdriver. And I always have players, we have electric. I said, no, 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 the old-fashioned screwdriver, right? If you want to tighten that screw, you use the screwdriver as your tool, right? But at the end of the day, it's your hand and your wrist, it's your body part that has to tighten that screw with that tool. If we could just attach skates to our bare feet, our blades to our bare feet, which I know would be impossible, that would be great, right? Because you'd have that's just your foot. At the end of the day, it's your foot and your body that is creating that skating movement and not your skate. Our skates are just tools that we attach the blades to help us skate across the ice. But you're spot on with, being able to feel that movement with through your foot and through your body versus the skate.
Yeah, I just
So
find
like,
if
yeah,
it's too you know, tight in there, you just don't get that feel for it anymore. Like you don't understand like when is it actually fully engaged. So that was always my hack as a kid. I remember a story
yeah,
about Bartholomew skating at his home, and he'd be able to just kick off his skates by the end of it, and just the amazing edge work that he probably got from that always was stuck with me, something to try. And then recently, Lane Hudson was talking about how him and his brothers still do that a little bit, where they'll just not tie up their skates and do edge work drills, which is really
yeah,
cool. So it's great
yeah,
to see like the
absolutely.
edges of the equipment and how is that actually used, especially as you mentioned between like what are the actual needs between speed skates, hockey skates, and figure skates. I think makes a ton of
Yeah.
sense. And then you started dabbling a little bit into kind of like the post-puberty ages and how do we go about getting skating technique? What does that look like?
So there again at that age, okay, yeah, you're gonna continue diving deep into the, proper technique, right? So that your players, are able to skate more efficiently, more effectively. But at the older ages, okay, this is where the knee bend is a must. You have to have good proper knee and ankle bend in order to create good power. I also talk about, still getting into power. This is where power comes into play. So like 10 and 12U players, I might be, working on crossovers just to get that movement pattern, a simple technique, let's say. But then you get to 14 and above. And again, these are just general guidelines, right? Because all players develop at different ages, right? So you may have a 13-year-old that has already reached puberty, you can say, okay, yeah, let's focus on some power. But so when I'm throwing these numbers out there, and as well as I, that they're just kind of general guidelines, right? So yeah, at that 14U and above, that's where like that knee and ankle bend becomes front and center. And this is where power and speed comes into play. So now I want you to take those forward crossovers, that backward stride, forward strides, whatever it is that and now we're going to focus on power. Now we're going to focus on speed, because now their body is capable of using the power and strength that they have in their muscles, and they're able to take that and apply it to their skating now. So I guess that means at the end of the day, I think you can kind of see that progression, right? From the 6U, 8U, 10 to 12U, and up to 14U and above. So yeah, I
Well,
mean,
I
so
think I
nothing.
think also like the post puberty. Again, I'm just observing. You have way more experience in this. Of like a lot of poor, maybe technique, as I call it, is really just an issue with strength and ability to hold your body in a position that it needs to be
100%.
in versus
Mm-hmm.
like movement patterns. And I'm thinking about soccer players. And like the movement patterns are pretty much fine. Like they got the right footwork
Yeah,
and weight transfers and all of this, but they just physically can't hold it until a certain age where then it all starts to come together. So it's like as you're thinking about when I think maybe like skating potential, like what's going to be easy to move up the ladder. Like let's get the footwork clean and then we'll start to
yeah,
add power and then we can start to figure out, okay, maybe get a good feel for it, where the weight is on the blade, where it is on the edges, because
yeah.
it seems like a lot, from my vantage point in the world, is an issue with strength training, and a lot of stuff could be fixed by simply just getting into the gym, working on your
Oh,
abs and those core stability and the ability to lean.
absolutely. Yeah. So I'd like to jump in on this one because you know, a lot of times I'll have like, a high school player or, like I said, AAA player that, 14U, 16U, whatever. And they want to get better at their skating, which is great. But one of the first questions I ask them, I'll say, but are you doing anything off the ice? Because at the end of the day, you're you're only going to get once you hit puberty, yeah, you are going to have more strength and more power, but you are going to hit that wall if you're not jumping into the gym, if you don't have a good solid training program where you are training doing like you said, the resistance training, working on your core strength, even doing plyometrics to develop more power, sprinting, so you can get, off ice sprinting is, not, 7 to 10 yards. That's it, right? Just to work on that speed. And if players in those older age brackets, if they're not doing that, they're not going to see that success on the ice. Okay, we now know that. Back when I skated in the 70s and early whatever, late 70s, early 80s, all we did was skate, because that's all we knew. But now, without getting that extra off ice training, a player is not going to reach their full potential when it comes to like, the power and the speed that they want out on the ice. So I can't stress that enough that older players, boys and girls alike, girls can lift weights too. It's not just for the boys. Just to develop that strength and that speed and the power on the ice.
Yeah,
So that's
because the strength is so important. Like one of the things that always changed my worldview was when someone was like, "Oh yeah, walking is just controlled falling." So I was like, "Well, skating is also controlled falling." It's like, how do you actually control it? And you need to put loads into your muscles and be able to push and resist all of that gravity. So it's like, how do we do
Correct.
controlled following? And like, especially when I think about like crossovers and generating speed within crossover, it's like you've got to lean to a point where you're falling and you've got to put your leg in there and push in order to
Yes.
equalize that force again.
Absolutely. And that's, yeah, without that, yeah, and that's why, you as you see players get older, and if they are doing putting that time into the weight room and they have that strength and the power, it's amazing what they can do. It's amazing what they can get their bodies to do and still be able to maintain positions because they have the strength and the ability to maintain those positions. So yeah, I mean, and so getting back, you had mentioned something about the younger players, like sometimes when you see them, and they look like they're not, out of control and not skating very well, it does but come down to the fact that they just don't have the muscular strength yet to maintain those positions. So, a lot of times you see young skaters or young players that have that when they do forward stride work and their legs kind of flicking, that hook and that kind of kicks behind them, and that's just because they don't have the strength yet to finish that extension, of their push all the way out through their big toe before they recover under their body. So that was whatever, I can't exactly remember how you said it, but it was great. I loved it. I should have written it down. But
Maybe the
yeah.
controlled falling. I don't know. That one.
No, it wasn't the control falling. It was the that looking at younger players that it's not so much that maybe that their technique is not very good. It was just they don't have the strength and the power yet. I think it was whatever that was. That was great because that's exactly what it is. So
Yeah. Yes, it's
it just
controlled falling. How do you do it? Or like another, and we're kind of getting into common issues here that you'll see with players. I call it the A-frame, where they're on two inside edges, and it's usually just a lack of comfort of leaning and being able to push and get out of that lean with your
yeah,
muscles. So often it's a gym problem that ends up being a technique problem that is very difficult for players to get out of as they age. And then which brings me to another pet peeve of mine, which is constantly working on inside edges. I'm like, the inside edge is like everyone knows that. Like that's very easy for
it's
a lot of players. It's about the glide
100%.
phase and the outside edge and how do we get players to work on those because
Yeah.
that's what skills they actually end up needing. And that leads to, the ankle, the ability to roll edges, etc.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So there's, but just by human nature, like our ankles tend to, like pronate like that. If you think about it, if you're just, and when I'm just standing still on the ice, like usually my ankles kind of droop inward, right? That's a natural, um, I guess human position, if you will, kind of thing. So yeah, inside edges are super easy. The outside edges, forward, even back, we'll talk about back. It applies to back outside and back inside edges as well. But yeah, the forward outside edges are definitely more challenging because you have to have, first of all, like I said, you've got to have your all of your body weight committed over that glide leg, and you have to have body lean. So one of the things that I like to do with, when if I see kids struggling on that outside edge, and again, I'll do this with younger players. I'll do this with, 10U, 12U, and sometimes if it's an 8U group that I've been working with, consistently, whatever, by the end of the season, like, hey, let's do this kind of, again, there are certain skating skills that I will introduce to players and teams based on how well I know them and what they're able to do, right? I mean, that's just kind of common sense, but when I want to help a player with their outside edge, one of the first things I'll do is I'll take them over to the boards, and I'll have them stand about a foot away from the boards, and then I'll have them just pick up their leg that's more towards the center of the ice, and I'll have them do like a full body lean against the board, so that their shoulder, their rib cage, their hip is on. So they're kind of making like oh my gosh, my math skills. Is that an isosceles triangle? Is that with the right angle, right? I don't know. I'm not a math guru, but anyways, so so they're basically doing like a side plank against the boards. Okay, so then that way they can feel that outside edge. So a lot of times players they struggle with that outside edge because it's an odd feeling for all of us as humans to like, we don't walk sideways, like we don't walk with that lean, right? So if you have your players feel that outside edge, like in isolation like that, just from a standstill, and then have them go out and try and have it while they're moving and gliding, it's like the light bulb goes on because they felt it in isolation. And then now they're not afraid to go out and try it while they're moving. So I mean, again, that's taking things way back, way back to square one, I guess. But though that's like one of the first things I do to help players get more comfortable with that outside edge. just to feel it first without any movement.
I think the other thing that kind of leads into is a common issue I see with players is where they move so fast, like it's their way of bridging poor technique. So they actually need to
Yes,
slow down, get the proper weight transfers rather than trying to speed
yes.
through it, which again kind of goes that control falling. Like they're putting three steps where there just needs to be one because they don't have the right body control yet, or they don't have the right power.
They're not they're getting that weight transfer that they need. That yeah, they're not getting a full weight transfer from one leg to the other, whatever. So they have to go transfer back to the other leg. But you're right. You made a great comment about that speed factor kind of thing. Like that's one of the biggest challenges of working with hockey players, is to have them kind of slow things down, and kind of, because at the end of, I think that most, during hockey practice, like the regular hockey practices, their coaches might, we always say, go, 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 push, 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 which is great. You want them, in a game-like situation, there's no doubt that you want your players to be moving, right? So I always tell my players, like, I mean, I love their energy and I love how fast you want to skate, but you know what, just slow it down. Okay, I want you to feel the position first. I want you to make sure that you've got your weight transferred 100% over your new leg before you push onto the other leg, so slowing things down and skating some of these, regardless of whether you're doing just forward stride, forward crossovers, backwards crossovers, whatever it is, slowing things down to kind of get the feel of the movement is huge. And that can be a real challenge because, again, players, they don't want to skate fast, they want to skate hard. But you're right about, just slowing things down and being able to like just feel the position before you go on to the next leg, and before you go on to the next leg. Um, but yeah, doing it a little bit under speed, if you will, a little slower, is really important before you throw that speed into it, for sure.
Yeah, I think another piece that we keep coming back to is like gaining a feel because skating's not something as you're playing a game that you're thinking about. It's kind of just letting it happen and having a feel for what it should feel like. Because eventually you need to forget about all of this and figure out what are the cues in the environment and what are we actually doing to play the game. So it's super important to have a player get a feel for their skating and what should that look like or what should that feel like
Feel
for
like,
them? Yeah.
right, right. No, absolutely. But it's fun. But so there's kind of there's a balance though, because at the end, at the end of the day, like you said, you know the game itself is so dynamic, right? It's an ever-changing environment. There's so much going on between like opponents and where the puck is and where your teammates are, blah 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 blah. So um you bring up a really good point, because I try when I'm working with teams or working with individual players, to maybe do a little bit of both, where I'm having them really focus on, good body position, good technique, but then there's other times where I may have them do things where they're off balance and do things that are really chaotic because they also have to be able to maintain, let's say they are skating an inside edge, and they're skating through the neutral zone and they have to quickly shift and avoid a player or something, and they may not be 100% balanced. So they have to practice that as well. Because if they're not doing some of that stuff off balance and they're comfortable skating off balance, then chances are they're going to fall when they hit that, if they try and, ride that edge in a weird position. So that's another challenge of working with hockey players is, yes, you want them to have good technique. You want them to be, strong and solid, but they also should be able to do movements where things are a little bit chaotic, a little off balance, so that they can maintain that in a game-like situation. So that's one of the things that I've done differently, like when it comes to edges, is getting away from those traditional like half circle after half circle after half circle up the ice. Because when in a hockey game does a hockey player skate their edges like that? And I'll ask, if you can probably answer that question.
Yeah, very, very rarely. And to your point of
And
like you need to hit the edge of failure where like you're wiping out or you're not having any success. The players that constantly stay in like that zone of comfort really
right,
struggle. And how do we get outside of that? And then to your point of like as we start thinking about designing activities and like what's a good way to go about this, do you go
right.
by the markings on the ice or something more game-like?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so that's where you have to kind of, like I said, find that balance. So there's, and there's nothing wrong with introducing, edges to players like that. Those traditional half circles up and down the ice. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, you did them when you were younger, right? But
Yeah,
if
they called them
that's
Russian circles in my world.
okay, well, I'm talking about those where you and I don't know, I don't even want to bring this up where you have players line up on the goal line and do, inside edge, half circle, inside edge, and the next, you're doing those half circle lobes up the ice,
Oh, the
right?
C
Um,
cut. Yeah, like
the
the
C, yeah,
just like
yeah,
the yeah.
forward inside edge, push another forward inside edge,
That's my least
anyways.
favorite one. I'm like, we all know how to do this. Can we just
Yeah,
skip it?
well, and that's my point. It's like, okay, well, that's great, but you know what? Let's take that to another level. Let's get beyond that like you said, get beyond that comfort zone and let's work on edges in a different way so that you're able to do them off balance, okay? Having to react, because another player's in your way and hit an inside edge. So that's where I do chaotic edges, I do infinity edges, I do agility edges, I do big arch edges, I do overspeed edges. So there's many different ways that I work on my edges with hockey players. And it's so much more fun. They love it. So I think as a skating specialist, one of the things that's really important for me is to, how do I take the skating skill and create some drills or activities that are going to mimic the game, which is, which I feel I've done a pretty good job at that. But it's definitely a challenge because skating is what we consider skating as a closed skill, right? It's very like um, technique oriented, right? But at the end of the day, the hockey game itself is what we consider like an open skill where there's just, there's, like I said, it's dynamic, it's ever changing. And so trying to marry those two worlds together, has been a real challenge for me. But that's why I'm constantly thinking, okay, what can I do to, change the skate? How can I take the skating skill and make it apply to the game? Depending on what I'm working on. So I think I might have just opened up another can of worms, but
Well, I really like the can of worms, so we should go here because you sent over a video before we hopped onto this podcast, and I really enjoyed the tag with silly poses, which was really fun.
oh,
So you get tagged, you got to do a silly pose, and the way you get unfrozen from the freeze tag is someone has to do a circle around you. That's a great way to work on turns, keeping it fun, age appropriate, just
yes.
making it more game realistic.
Yeah.
Like, where's the edges? It's not the same exact spot, and we're not also ruining the ice for the next group behind us.
Exactly. Yeah. So and there's no one standing in line. So these kids are getting a chance to practice their tight turns or hockey turns, whatever. I mean, I think everyone uses different terminology across the country. But it gives these kids a chance to work on their tight turns, um, and get the reps in without, like you said, repeating the movement in the same spot, making ruts in the ice. And the kids love it. It's a lot of fun. And like so I sent you the clip. I think those girls were in one of the end zones, but there's times like I'll do, if I have full ice, I might do that same exercise on full ice first for the first set. Then I'll take them into the end zone. Then I'll take them into no, half ice, end zone, neutral zone. So each time the space is getting a little bit smaller. And then I'll ask the players, like, which one did you think was fat? Once everyone's all unfrozen, in which zone were you able to unfreeze everyone the fastest? And they said, oh, the neutral zone. They were able to, they actually could figure that out. I'm like, yeah, because it was a smaller space, and I said, so that, you have to remember that so much of your game takes place in this small area. And you don't have a lot of time to make decisions. So there again, I was able to take a skating movement activity and actually make that connection to the game as well. So I try really hard to do that with my skating, to make those connections between their movement and then when they're going to use it in a game. So, but yeah, that's a fun way to practice. And the kids, yeah, they love it. They enjoy that activity for sure.
Yeah, so there's a player that you've worked that is getting some NHL game time now, and you've been his coach for a really long time. I'm curious what that evolution has looked like, because he's definitely considered by the scouts that I've chatted with a good skater. So one tip of the cap to him and also you. Curious, just as you've seen him go through the age groups and what that's looked like, along with your
Yeah,
relationship.
yeah, for 100%. So, again, I'm not gonna. I did teach school for a while, so I usually don't mention names, but just because I'm the protection of the player and family, right? I don't know, that's just kind of a weird thing with me. But yes, so I started working with him when he was about 12. Um, oh, and just yeah. I mean, again, it was that, but like you mentioned, like just gangly, couldn't, he couldn't get his body to do the things that he wanted to do, kind of thing, and so that, and what's interesting about that is how do I started working with him about the time I started transitioning into like working with hockey players. So he and I kind of grew together, me as a coach, him as a player, if that makes any sense. Um, but yeah, so back when he was, 12 and, in those younger years, I mean, basically all I worked on was just getting him to understand the technique, getting his body to just, go through the motions, if you will. I didn't focus on the power and the speed because I knew that that was not like the focal point at that age. Okay. But then I don't know if you know, on a side note, I've also, up until 2 summers ago, I was a strength and conditioning coach as well. So I worked with his teams, his AAA teams. So I was the strength and conditioning coach for those teams. And I also did all of his off-ice training in the summer up until he was 21 years old. And so I really was fortunate to see that development off the ice as well, to see how he, year after year, how he got bigger, faster, stronger off the ice, right? And then how it transferred to on ice. And so then, then as he got a little bit older and got bigger, faster, stronger, I was able to focus on, okay, now you've got to do this, with more speed, with more power, whatever it is we were working on. And now, interestingly enough, now that he's kind of reached that, yeah, he is a good skater and people have noticed that. Now, just this past summer working with him, I went back to, and he and I did a lot of like intricate, challenging edge work that I would probably not do with anyone that wasn't as strong as he was, like where you have to do everything on just one foot, like, edge, 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 hold for a full. I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but, so, we'd spend an hour and a half on the ice this summer. Probably the first 40 minutes was working on like edge quality, edge work, forward, backward, inside, outside, deep knee bend, the deep ankle bend, that kind of stuff. So we kind of went back to some of those basics and did, and just I like to call it, we tuned up a lot of things, because even though he's pretty darn good. There's always room for improvement, or you know, actually more specifically during the season, hockey players really don't focus on, and they don't have time. They don't focus on their skating skills, right? So by the end of the season, they're ready to come back and work on those skills, get that tune up and review things. Yeah, so it's been a fun journey, 100%. But I will definitely say that he really followed that, what we talked about, that age appropriate development.
What
So,
were what were some of the hurdles for him? I'm curious, like what were some of the hurdles and how did you overcome those as he aged? Obviously, you're starting with technique and getting a feel and then working from there, but I'm just curious if there were some specific things for him that he struggled with.
yeah, well, at the end of the day, when he was, probably like 12U for like those, like I should say middle school ages, if you will. Right, like I think before he hit puberty. A lot of the thought it was his quickness and his foot speed. Well, actually it's not foot speed, it's hip speed, because our hips are what move our feet. Um, he just didn't have that. Um, he just didn't have the foot speed, or the like we call it foot speed, but I know from a kinesiology standpoint, it's the his hips didn't move. Didn't have the strength in his hip flexors to be able to, recover quick enough, or move his feet fast enough. So that was definitely the biggest hurdle. And again, what fixed that was his commitment to doing the right thing off the ice. Getting, that in the gym, in the summer, we were doing 4 days of weight training and one day of like off ice, like plyometrics, going to a track, working on, I did, sprint drills and things like that, like a wide receiver would do, kind of a thing, to get him to, do all that, agility movement and stuff like that. And as he got more proficient in that off the ice through his weight training and through his this agility drills that we would do, I saw that difference on the ice. So kind of, and again, I'm going to go back to saying when your players are ready and they're at that age, the importance of the off ice training. Because without that, you're just going to be banging your head against the wall trying to get them to be better on the ice. So that was probably the biggest hurdle. And as he developed that strength, okay, and that quickness and that agility off the ice, I saw it blossom on the ice. And then yeah, once he got it, up, upper high school, college, I mean, all of a sudden it was like, boom, he blossomed. It was great.
Yeah, he had the foundation to blossom. And,
Hmm.
and I love the fact that you're now going back to the basics. Like
Yeah,
things do break down. Like even within a shift, skating tends to break down from beginning to end, and within a game from beginning to end. And having that ability to go back to the basics, tune things up after a full season of going through
right,
that wear and tear cycle, because it does, especially I think even just older NHLers, for example, like you see some of their skating get worse and worse and worse. And
right.
just naturally, some of that will be age, but a lot of times you see some of these top players circling back to these foundational pieces because it's so imperative to continuing to have those skills. And it's so massive. And then the second piece I loved was around like foot speed's an issue. Okay, well, you probably need to go do abs and hips in the gym. Like that'll solve the issue
There
much
you
more than anything else. Or
absolutely,
people just
yeah,
naturally carry more weight in their legs. Like you have to be able to pick those up a little bit better than those that don't have as much, what we'll call the chicken legs. Like Eric Carlson
right,
for me is like the classic example in the NHL. Looks skinny on the legs, but has so much power in there, but he also doesn't need as much to move those legs around compared to
e-
like a David Savard, who is just absolutely massive a human being. He needs more
right,
mass there. So
right.
it's really how do we sync these two together to have positive outcomes for what you want.
Right, exactly. And I like what you said about, the NHLers, that when it's a long season, right? And again, they're not taking the time to work on those skating skills. So if you look at the like the, big picture, from whatever, September till, well, April for some, and in my player's case till June, right? Um, that's a long season. And so at the end of so if you look at the big picture, by the time you're getting to that tail end of your season, you're tired, like you're fatigued. I'm not talking about like short burst, like, a shift tight, like, but I'm talking about big picture, how tired players get. And when you're tired at the end of the season like that, yeah, your technique tends to break down. That's just natural. That's what happens. And so that's why you hear of so many NHL players going back to wherever they live or whatever, and hooking up, getting together with their skating instructor and like doing that tune up, because and just kind of waking that, those muscles up and say, oh yeah, this is what that feels like, and I need to remember to get better at that and kind of thing. I need to, so it is pretty fascinating that even players at that level, how they continue to develop and keep, but getting better at their craft, if you will. And I'm sure that it happens across all sports, right? I mean, I'm thinking all athletes probably do that based on what sport they play, I would think, but I don't know enough about other sports to be able to say for sure. But yeah, I like that comment that you made. That's great.
All right, did I miss anything around skating? I feel like we've covered so much from age appropriate skating to even like activity design, whether it be circles and ovals, not lines, making sure that we've got some great activity design, whether that be chaotic edges, overspeed, underspeed, fixing techniques, some common issues. Is there anything else on your mind that we
No,
think we should chat?
I don't, well, the other thing that, so this is kind of segues with, we talked about, the getting away from teaching those like the non-traditional edges. One of the other, I guess, boxes I try to check off when I'm working with hockey players is, how can I incorporate the five elements of a good practice or a hockey drill into my skating? I don't not, and I don't. I think I can mention this that comes from USA Hockey's coaching curriculum, right? Those five elements are puck touches, challenging, decision making, game like, making it fun, right? So As a skating instructor, when I design my skating drills, I try to find ways to, get some puck touches in there. And that's easy, have them skate the drills with pucks, right? How do I make it challenging for them? Decision making. Like sometimes what I'll, that's challenging, but it's important, I think, that you have your players do their skating drills or skating movements and have them make a decision. For example, I call them action perception edges, where I might have players, skate toward like, 4 or 5 players start on, on the goal line, and there's 4 or 5 players maybe lined up on the middle red line, and they'll skate towards their buddy that's, directly across from them. And then once they get close to that player that's standing still, that player that stands still has, if they flip their stick to the right, then you have to do a quick inside edge to the left. If they flip their stick to the left, you have to do a quick inside edge to the right. So now they're doing that edge work based on a decision. Okay, which again kind of transfers to the game. So that's kind of I would say within the last year or two. Hey, how can I take my skating activities and my skating, whatever, skills, movements, whatever it is, and how can I add some decision making into the mix? How can I make it a little more game like? So I mean, I think that's important too. Because at the end of the day, yes, these players have to have that strong foundation. Their technique has to be good, but they have to also be able to perform so many of those skating movements, you know, in the heat of the moment, based on a decision, based on what's going on in the game. So I think that's been a challenge for me as a coach to do that. But it's been fun for the players to do their skating skills like that as well. They look forward to their skating sessions with me, and that's not always the case. I don't know if I see you laughing, like when you, huh?
No,
Oh,
that's really good. I remember doing a camp up at the University of Michigan, and TJ Hensick was just flipping pucks over the power skating coach's head. She stood up the same moment that he flipped his last puck and cut her open, and we didn't have to do power skating. Let me tell you, the kids were ecstatic.
because you didn't have to do it, right?
Didn't have to
Yeah,
do it, yeah, because it was just that painful.
yeah,
But yeah, when it's
yeah,
fun like that, and it's to your point, like even with the 8U, 6U, like you're hiding technique within the fun, the game, the activity, like we'll do that all day. I'll still do
absolutely.
that as an adult. Like I'm in. I want to go play
100,
freeze tag right now.
100%, absolutely. Do you know, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I work with an association over in the Southwest Michigan, and like at 14, can we play cops and cars? Can we do pirates and piranhas? I'm like, and these guys are like 15, 16 years old. I'm like, ah, yeah, we'll do it let's do it at the end, or maybe we'll do it at the beginning. Like, because you know what? That's fun. As long as your kids and your players are having fun, their learning is going to take place. I'm a firm believer in that. And so, I mean, you hear, make it fun. And we don't mean like goofing around fun, but if you make it challenging, if add, those other elements into your skating drills, it's going to be fun and the players are going to learn. And they're going to, like you said, they're going to want to do it all day. So, I thought I wanted to add that in because I feel that that's been kind of a new development in my coaching, if that makes any sense. And that's kind of a new path I'm taking my drills down. So, and it's so far it's been great. It's been working.
If you're not a coach who looks back at your old stuff and cringes a little bit, I
Oh,
don't think you're doing the right things. I was talking with a few coach, like a skills coach that works up in Canada for an NHL team, and he was like, "Man, if my players in yesteryears, like they had some success, if only I was able to get to them with what I know now and how I do things now, they would be NHL superstars."
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I look back at some of the drills I did, 3 or 4 years ago, and I cringe, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Yeah, like I mean yes. I mean, what is that expression they say? As soon as you think you know everything, you should just stop what you're doing because I don't think any of us ever know everything. As a coach, I think we all need to have that growth mindset that, there's always more to learn. There's always something we can do to make us better. And I'm always going down that path, like, what can I do to make myself a better coach? Because if I become a better coach, my players even become more successful. So, yeah,
Coach
yeah.
development is player development. Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. There you go. 100%. Yeah,
Awesome.
because yeah. Awesome, awesome. But no, I think we covered everything. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions or I'm just trying to
This has
think.
been wonderful, Marcia. I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on. We'll
Yeah,
have to
absolutely.
see you on the ice a few times. I know you're not big on social media and posting things out there, but I'm glad that we're able to highlight you and the work that you're doing on the podcast here because it's truly amazing and wonderful. And we've seen
Yep.
results from people that we shall not name.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And you're right, I should post more, but I don't know. I'm a dinosaur. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I don't know. Maybe you'll be surprised. I'll surprise everyone one day and post some things. But yeah, it's been great. I thank you for having me. It's been a fun way to start my morning for sure.
Awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yep. All right. You're welcome. Thank you.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website hockeysarsenal.com where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.